Joining me, Senator Marco Rubio. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I want to start with North Korea. Last night, after North Korea conducted another ballistic missile launch, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson released this statement, quote, "The United States has spoken enough about North Korea. We have no further comments." That follows senior White House officials stating a few hours earlier that the clock has now run out and all options are on the table. If you're Japan or South Korea, are you comforted by those statements from America, or are you confused about what we might be looking at doing?
Well, I certainly think they prefer us to be stronger rather than weaker, and those statements elicit some sort of quiet strength. So here's the problem, and Japan and South Korea know this well, and I imagine so do the people at the White House. There are not a lot of great options here. Let's walk through one of them, for example, and that is that let's walk through perhaps the most extreme, which is some sort of military strike against elements of their nuclear program. We know and believe that the North Koreans would immediately respond with a massive conventional retaliation against South Korea, particularly Seoul. And from the time they fire to the time they hit, you're talking about 45 seconds or to a minute. So you're going to have massive potential civilian casualties and a lot of economic damage. The South Koreans will respond in kind, probably escalating the conflict even further. And suddenly you'll have a hot war on the Korean Peninsula, not only with about 3,000 Americans stationed right on the armistice line, but a nuclear-armed country on the other end of it. If it gets bad enough because of the airstrike, because of whatever it may be, you could see China move into North Korea because for two reasons. One, they don't want a massive refugee flow. Two, because they don't want a unified Korea. The notion of a unified Korea with a United States presence right on their perimeter and periphery is not something the Chinese would be excited about. So quickly you could have a hot war between North Korea and South Korea, one of the two combatants owning nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver them, and a Chinese potential incursion into portions of North Korea to create a buffer and prevent a migratory crisis. This is a big deal, and that's how quickly this could escalate. So I know and I hope that they're being very careful in analyzing all their options.
Let's turn to Syria. We all know about Obama's red line and failure to follow through on that. Should the current president, in light of yesterday's most recent chemical weapons attack, set his own red line that lets Assad, the Russians, and Iran know if it happens again, under his watch, that the United States will intervene and punish this Assad regime?
Well, first of all, I was opposed to what the president wanted to do the last time, and here's why. Because if you set a red line, but then you say my retaliation is going to be symbolic, it wouldn't have made a difference. In fact, I think it would have made things worse. I voted against it, not because I was against doing something against Assad, but because I felt what the president wanted to do would actually not be enough and would actually set us back. In this case now, we have very limited options. And look, it's concerning that the Secretary of State 72 hours ago or a week ago, last Friday, said, that this is the future's up to the people in Syria on what happens with Assad, in essence almost nodding to the idea that Assad was going to get to stay in some capacity. I don't think it's a coincidence that a few days later we see this. Assad believes, and sadly he may be right, that he can gas his people with sarin, kill children, kill innocent civilians. People will complain, there'll be a meeting at the UN Security Council, and then life will go on, and he'll stay in power. He's made that calculation. The Russians support him on it. China is indifferent. And I hate to say this, I think he's going to get away with it again.
I know you're keeping a close eye on the Russian investigations. You said last week that the Russians had targeted your campaign, and as recently as last week, they had went after former campaign staffers. There's lots going on with the Russian investigations, but I want to ask you about the most recent developments regarding President Trump and what he's had to say specifically about the Obama administration. Have you seen any evidence to lead you to believe that President Trump was in any way correct when he tweeted that President Obama had Trump Tower wiretapped prior to the election?
Well, there's now debate about what wiretap means. Let me just say what I've said repeatedly, and that is, to this date, I have seen no evidence that would allow me to agree with what he said. Now, that said, I'm on the Intelligence Committee. We are conducting a bipartisan and serious investigation, and we're going to lay it all out there. We're going to look at multiple things. On an ongoing basis as a committee, we look at how the Intelligence Committee operates and whether they're operating not just effectively, but within the law. That will be part of our inquiry. We'll look at Russian efforts to active measures in our elections to conduct an influence campaign, both through the use of fake news and Twitter trolls, but also through the strategic placing of leaked information that was illegally acquired. That's going to be a part of it. And we'll look at, what this means for the future, because this is not going to end with 2016. It's going to be an ongoing pattern, and it's happening in many parts of the world today. All of that is part of our inquiry. We're making good progress. I'm confident we'll be able to issue a report that answers a lot of these questions, hopefully in a bipartisan way, and then the appropriate agencies and the American people will get to make a decision about who's right and who's wrong here. But we're still doing that work, and I don't want to prejudge it until we have all the facts before us, and I don't want to do anything that undermines the credibility of the report that we're working on. We've already seen what that looks like when it happens. The House has faced some issues, as you know.
Are you confident that something substantial will be done after your investigation to make sure that what happened in this past election won't happen again?
I would hope so. Some of it is very difficult to deal with. When you've got these Twitter trolls, hundreds at a time, that are sitting around all day pushing negative stuff out there that isn't true, when you've got Russian-owned state media creating fake stories that are being picked up by mainstream outlets, I think the best thing we can do is awareness. We have to shine a light on it, and people need to know that a lot of these conspiracy things that you're reading about on the Internet are not true. And some of them are being driven by people that want clicks on a website, and some of them may be driven by foreign agents of influence that are trying to sow instability and undermine our democracy and ultimately get Americans to fight against each other. And because they think the weaker we are, the stronger they get. And so I think just shining a light on that reality and showing people how it's worked in the past will allow us to process that information and deal with it as voters in the future.
We're talking to Senator Marco Rubio. Finally, tell us about your VA Accountability First Act.
Well, the Secretary of the VA, Secretary Shulkin, who's actually served under the Obama administration as well, so it's not a partisan issue, was on this weekend talking about how an employee at the VA in Houston was viewing pornography as he was treating a patient, and he can't fire him. And he's got to wait 30 days to even begin the proceedings. And in the meantime, we got to keep paying him. And so what my law would do is it would allow the VA secretary to fire anyone at the VA who is not doing a good job or is violating the rules. That employee will have due process. They can defend themselves and if they think it's been wrongful. But any organization that doesn't have accountability is not going to be successful, is not going to be able to operate. And so we need to give him that, and that's what he's asking for. And so that's my bill. We're working on it. It's already passed the House, and we've had trouble with Democrats here in the Senate on it, but hopefully we'll get it passed. It's important.
Senator Marco Rubio here on AM Tampa Bay. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on.